Hello, good evening. Welcome to our Zootech channel. Today I'm going to take a topic on diversity in the living world. Today I'm just going to give a brief introduction about this diversity in the living world. So we'll go to the topic now. Diversity in the living world. So all living forms coexist with each other. There are about 8.7 million species of animals which have been identified, named, described and classified. A study reports that 86% of all species on the land and 91% of those in the seas are yet to be discovered, described and catalogued. So though humans are placed in the topmost position on the hierarchy, they have to depend on the plants and animals for food. So this chapter is going to deal with the diversity of the living world, need for classification, types of classification, taxonomical hierarchy, nomenclature and tools for studying taxonomy. So there are a variety of species that have been adapted successfully to live in this diverse ecosystem. So what do you mean by ecosystem? What does ecosystem mean? Ecosystem means the community of living organisms, that is both plants and animals. Non-living environment including mineral, climate, soil, water and sunlight. So the biotic factors and abiotic factors. So biotic means we say living things and abiotic we say the non-living things. So it is a community. Ecosystem is a community of living organisms and non-living environment including your minerals, climate, soil, water, sunlight and their interrelationships. So this was given by A.G. Tansley. Sorry. Was given by A.G. Tansley in the year 1935. So this was given by A.G. Tansley in the year 1935. So the presence of a large number of species in a particular ecosystem, you call it as biodiversity. You call it as biodiversity. Biodiversity, that is biological. It can be otherwise called as biological diversity. Biodiversity or biological diversity. Okay. So what is biodiversity? It refers to all the variety of life that can be found on earth as well as to the communities that they form and the habitats. The place where it lives, in which they live. So this term biodiversity was first introduced by, Walter Rosen. It was introduced by Walter Rosen in the year 1985 and it was defined by E.D. Wilson. And was defined by E.D. Wilson on a later part. So okay. Now, this ecosystem, the biodiversity definition and all. Now, coming to the subtopic, why there is a need for classification? What is the need for classification? So, it is really highly impossible to study all the living organisms. Hence, it becomes necessary to devise some means and methods to make this possible, and this process is called as classification. So, it is a process by which the things are grouped in convenient categories based on the easily absorbable characters. So the scientific term used for these categories, they are called as taxa. You call it as taxa, T-A-X-A. It is called as taxa. It indicates the categories at different levels. For example, kingdom, if you take kingdom Animalia, it is what? It is a multicellular. It includes a multicellular animals such as reptiles, mammals, etc. So, based on the characteristics what is happening, all the living organisms can be classified into different taxa. So, this classification, the science of classification is called as what? The science of classification, you call it as taxonomy. The science of classification is called as taxonomy. So, the external and internal structures along with the developmental processes and ecological information of organisms are essential as they form the basis of the taxonomical studies. For this, characterization, identification, nomenclature and classification, they are the scientific stages that are basic to the taxonomy. Now we'll see what is the basic need for classification, in which involves 5 steps. Now we'll see what are the 5 steps involved in this classification. The 5 steps need for classification. So, the first point we can say, to identify and differentiate, to identify and differentiate closely related species. What are the species which are closely related? Second one, we have to see the variation. To identify, first one is to identify and differentiate closely related species, and second one, we wanted to know the variation among the species. To study the variation among the species, and third one, to study the evolution. To study the evolution of a species, and then to create a phylogenetic tree. To create a phylogenetic tree, and finally to conveniently to study the living organisms. Conveniently study the living organisms. So the 5 steps, first one is to identify and differentiate closely related species. Then to know the variation among the species. What is variation among the species? That is the differences in the characteristics between the individuals of the same species. To understand the evolution of the species is what? The process by which the different kinds of organisms are believed to have developed from earlier forms during the history of Earth, and then we want to create a phylogenetic tree-like structures, and finally we want to study the conveniently about the living organisms. And the other subtopic we are going to deal is taxonomy and systematics. We are going to talk about now taxonomy and systematics. So taxonomy, I told you already, what is taxonomy? It is the arrangement of living organisms along with classification, description, identification and naming of organisms, which includes all flora and fauna, that is the plants and animals, and including the microorganisms of the world, that's bacteria, virus, fungi, etc., which are present in the world. The word taxonomy was coined by Augustin Pyramus Candolle in the year 1813. Okay, and if we say the father of taxonomy is Aristotle. Father is Aristotle. Aristotle is called the father of taxonomy. He is called the father of taxonomy, and Carolus Linnaeus, he is called the father of modern taxonomy. He is called as the father of modern taxonomy. Okay. Now we wanted to see the difference between the taxonomy and systematics. What is the difference? The objectives of taxonomy and systematics are very similar. Their goal is to classify the organism with stipulated rules. So the main criteria of systematics is identifying, describing, naming, arranging and preserving and documenting the organisms. So that is the difference. Okay. So that is the difference between the taxonomy and systematics. Okay. Now, so far I have given you some brief introduction on this. In my next video, I'll be uploading the history of classification. So keep watching my video. Please subscribe and share it to your friends. Thanks for watching. Thank you.